What you are about to hear is part one of a special 3-part documentary report examining the plight of many injured workers being denied accommodation in the current workers' compensation system in Manitoba and elsewhere. My name is Michael Welch. April 28th is known in Canada as the National Day of Mourning. This day commemorates workers who have been killed or suffered disease or injury due to workplace-related accidents or incidents. In 1984, this day was chosen by the Canadian Union of Public Employees and the Canadian Labour Congress. It was on this day in 1914 that the Workers' Compensation Act was passed in the Canadian House of Commons, and a brand new system of compensation for work-related injuries was born. This federal legislation enabled the creation of boards that operated at the provincial level and would ostensibly provide injured workers with compensation while protecting employers from lawsuits. While the system may sound positive and affirming, there is evidence to the effect that Canadians are becoming frustrated with this system.
This is our top story. Police in Edmonton are now negotiating with a gunman reported to be holding several hostages. The situation is unfolding inside the Workers' Compensation Building, downtown Edmonton.
Wednesday, October 21st, 2009. A drama is unfolding in which an armed man in his late 30s, Patrick Clayton, has walked into the WCB office in Edmonton and begun taking hostages. Clayton had apparently been driven by a desperate desire to communicate his plight to the larger society. Mr. Clayton had been subjected to tremendous hardship. He was a carpenter who had been laid off due to a workplace injury, but unable to make a living on what little compensation he was offered. Clayton eventually freed his hostages and turned himself over to the police. While the mainstream media largely focused on the question of how a man with a gun could get into such a secure facility, questions of what would drive Mr. Clayton to such desperate measures were largely ignored. It turns out that there is more sympathy for Mr. Clayton than one might otherwise think. While few would condone what Mr. Clayton has done, many people, such as the injured workers you are about to meet, could totally relate to the distress and frustration Patrick Clayton was no doubt experiencing.
We are staying right on top of this story and will bring you the developments, the latest developments, as they happen.
It was an injury to your back?
Mm-hmm. Due to heavy lifting and twisting, it was nothing falling on me or nothing, and so I went to emergency. I thought claims were put in for me, and they weren't. And I was only 21 at the time.
Okay, so what did you go then to the WCB and ask, okay, what do I do to get this to go through?
Yes, I did. I called them and they said, who are you? They basically treated me like, whatever. He made me wait a couple months to meet an adjudicator, and they used that as the date to the date of submission of claim, which wasn't really true. I'd called them way before that. And they ended up using all these timelines against me. And the WCB, there's an act that says you have a 1-year time frame, and that can actually be extended. I got hurt, and I submitted my claim within that 1 year. The WCB went as far as to say to me, after denying me so many times, that, this is even the appeal commission, which is supposed to be independent, has said there's no way they'd ever admit to a fault that they've made in any case, ever. So that means what they say goes, doesn't matter. They say it's the end of the line. If they say that, you're done. There is no fighting, blah, blah, blah. It's all over. Forget about it. You weren't hurt at work, blah, blah, blah. They try to tell injured workers they weren't hurt at work. What more do you want to do to an injured person that was hurt at work other than, I can't even say. What can you do?
What do you believe needs to be done to correct this unjust treatment you feel you received?
Well, what I've been told is the act has to be changed, the WCB Act, but on the other hand, they're not applying the act in my case. That's the question. What can be done about them not applying the act? the government, the WCB, because nobody seems to claim responsibility for what they do to people like me. Put a price on someone's life, go ahead, because that's what they've done to me. They've taken a life.
Yeah.
You know, I don't take it personally because they do it to everybody. Mm-hmm. But they almost took my life away. All of it.
My name is Steve. I was injured on October 11th, 96. Fell on a government job site. Compensation was paying me there. After about a year, they were giving me $141 every 2 weeks. $141 isn't 90% of your wages. And as the years go by, like the doctor said, you're not going to get better. Things are just going to get worse. I went through ombudsman, I went through advocators. I've gone to other people to try and help me look at where I fell from. I fell 2 stories. I went into steel rail, bounced off cement steps and landed about 20 feet out on the grass. So compensation figures I only injured my right shoulder. You don't fall 2 stories into concrete and everything and only injure one part of your body. But that's all they're concerned about is here. And they determine by measuring how long the scar is. They should measure the pain for 12 years, October 11th. Well, those 12 years, I don't think I had 12 days without pain. And I mean constant pain and severe pain. Keeps you from sleeping, keeps you from even thinking right. If you don't rest, your body doesn't function right. Like I said, if I had a vehicle, if I had some money, I could be creating some jobs for people, which I used to do before. Right now, I'm not able to do that. And I used to do a bit of everything, from building a house to commercial fishing to construction, road construction, you name it. I just wish I could keep on continuing to help more. But like I said, you can't get around that well, don't have a vehicle, no money, all that, so it's very hard.
Name's Logan. Hurt myself at work about 3 years ago. I was lifting a box, 200-pound pump or something like that, and rather than putting it down, I twisted and hurt my back. My own company decided to tell me not to go to WCB. I went to WCB about a week after I went to WCB a week after I got hurt, thinking I just sprained something, and I was, I guess not really hurt. I went to the doctors, got x-rays, went through everything, found out I had a couple discs out of whack and it was putting pressure on my nerve housing. I got forced back to work 3 times, lost my job. They fired me the day I was let off of WCB monetarily, compensation-wise, and I'm still here. I'm still taking training courses. They're trying to force me off right now. They're trying to say that I have to get back to work and this and that, and it's like, yes, I would love to be working, but with a spinal injury after going through surgery, 5 epidurals, nothing's changed. I still have an injury. I still can't walk. I still don't sleep. I'm on all sorts of medications that give me problems from sleeplessness to stomach problems, high blood pressure. One thing I have to say is the support from this place, the WCB, hasn't really been there. There is no support. They have their policies, they have their procedures, they don't leave them, and they rely on them as a fallback for when they don't do something right. Well, procedure told me. Well, policy told me to do that. And that's crap. They know I had problems. I should have had my surgery at 3 months rather than 2.5 years later. I had to fight to get my surgery. My own company appealed it, and they won the appeal to cancel my surgery. How is that even legal? How can a company where I got hurt and they appealed, I got one. How can they appeal a surgery that I need and win it? And then my surgery gets canceled.
Some of the defenders of the WCB will say that changes had to be made because there was abuse in the system. Do you buy that?
There's abuse in every system. Welfare abuse. You got abuse driving on the streets. You got abuse in people's homes. Of course there's going to be abuse, but they should have a government watchdog, some kind of an oversight committee that keeps an eye on them. If they're not, you look at this building and they're an arm's length crown corporation. Who's watching them? Not the freaking guys on the legislative grounds. They're sitting there in their offices trying to ignore the issues when it's sitting right in here.
I was injured in 96 with a back injury, doing some heavy lifting for my employer, W.C.B. I had a initial CTC scan done in the hospital when I was bedridden there and lost feeling in my foot and toes. I eventually got out of the hospital. WCB said it was just muscle problems, and then I waited for a year and a half before I got a doctor to get an orthopedic surgeon to do surgery on my back, and there was a very badly damaged sciatic nerve. Surgery got back feeling in my toes and the bottom of my foot, but I still have the nerve pain right down to my ankle today, and losing muscle in buttock, thigh, and calf. I've tried going through a Canmore program in Alberta. My employer facilitated 2-week working. I went in for 3 weeks and then worked for 2 weeks and then went back for another 3 weeks. But within that 2 weeks, I did a sedentary type job for my employer. I was only able to do 4 days instead of the whole 2 weeks that they wanted me to do. And then when I came out of Canmore, I wasn't able to go back to my original line of work. My employer wasn't happy with that. They said there wasn't going to be any retraining or anything. Eventually, WCB did say, we'll try retraining, we'll go to school. And W.C.B. was supposed to no longer be my employer. In 2000, they did some surveillancing on me, and they hid the tape for a year. And I found out just by file updates through WCB that they had done this. No one even at WCB told me about it. And I guess it just got washed under the bridge today because nothing had ever happened with those tapes. I was just really upset with them, and as far as it went, the appeal commission, I wasn't even able to show any of the tapes to show my credibility, because all the railway was doing was wrecking my credibility. They even had a fathom of jobs I've turned down with the railway that there's no mention in my file of any of these jobs or anything like that, but they tried to pull the wool over the appeal commission's eyes. And they based all their weight on the surveillance tapes throughout all my doctors' present physical examinations, which I had about 3 or 4 of them, along with a physiotherapist too as well, and they still denied it.
For 20 years I did personal care for people with disabilities, and one night at work I herniated a disc, putting somebody into their wheelchair. It was a 1.5-year battle with workers' comp, and I never got anywhere. They cut me off, and I can never do that job again. In 2001, I got into doing courier, which is easier on the back, and I herniated a disc again, got hit with sciatic nerve trouble. After, I think it was 5 months, workers' comp cut me off. They said there's no such thing as sciatic nerve. From that point, I've been on social assistance because I cannot work. Just sitting on the toilet, my legs jump, they go to sleep. The pain is ridiculous. I've lost half my weight. I've had to have gastric bypass to lose weight. I've had a number of surgeries since, and I'm not able to work. I've done everything humanly possible to help my back, and it's not working.
About depression.
Depression? Yes. Major case of depression. I've been suicidal. It's when workers' comp says no, you have no recourse, and workers' welfare doesn't help you until they get a decision from workers' comp. When I hurt my back in 92, I ended up eating my cat's cat food. I had Dave Chomiak come and see me because I spent 1.5 years on the floor in my apartment. It's not fair, and it's happening to more and more people. The doctors don't want to take your word. They don't take your doctor's word. My doctor saw me every week for years. To this day, she said I should never have been cut off. Workers' comp says, prove it. You can't fight with workers' comp. I'm stuck on welfare, where they treat you like dirt. Your income it's terrible. I've tried to work. I can't do it. My back is finished. It's not fair. And I'm mad as hell.
I was injured on November the 17th in 1999, coming back from Toronto, Ontario, on the way to Saskatoon. And there was a snowstorm. I was on number 11 coming back, pulled into Hearst. Got out of the truck. It was a highway was closed because of a rain and snowstorm. I went in, had a coffee, and come back out. Went to get back in the truck, and it was just built up with ice. Got halfway up and in the truck. I just opened the door to take a hold of the wheel, took my hand off the bar. Next thing I found out, I was on the ground on a block of ice about the size of a computer. And my head bounced off the tires of the truck that was pulling up beside us. Didn't even see me. And my shoulder, it was bothering me all the way from there to Winnipeg. I went back to see my doctor. He gave me pills and that. And he said there was nothing wrong, but there was. WCB wouldn't give me an MRI. 3 years later, I got an MRI done, and my shoulder was buggered up in 3 places. The tendons were torn, and the muscle was torn. But according to them and their doctors, they said there was nothing the matter. And then I was in an accident in 2005, coming back from Calgary, or Regina, and they both got broke, and my right one wasn't as bad as my left again, but I can't lift either one of my shoulders or lift any weight on my arm, either one of my arms, and they're still saying there's nothing the matter, you can go back to work. But they don't understand what driving transport is all about and what your jobs are. I couldn't even crank a dolly on a trailer right now if I had to. Tried carrying a 2-liter bottle of Coke in my left hand, and I dropped it on the floor. And this is what I've been putting up with. And trying to talk to WCB is like trying to talk to a slot machine. They'll steal the money off you before you ever get an answer. And that's about the way things have been going for me since '99.
According to a 2002 paper entitled Turning the Tide, Renewing Workers' Compensation in Manitoba, from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, thousands of injured workers in Manitoba are being denied adequate compensation. In the words of report author Doug Smith, the Filmon government did not just tinker with workers' compensation, it made major changes that had significant results. The resulting problems are not minor failings, they are festering injustices. You've just heard part 1 of a documentary report examining the failings of the current workers' compensation system. You heard 2009 interviews with a number of injured and disabled workers, as well as a clip from a Canadian Broadcasting Corporation report. In part 2 of this special series, we will take a closer look at the workers' compensation system and talk with researchers and activists who will give their perspectives on why the current compensation system is failing injured and disabled workers. Part 2 airs tomorrow at this same time. I'm Michael Welch.
More people were wrongfully and unjustly and unreasonably, benefits were declined, taken away, you couldn't get them, it was just an uphill battle even with your own medical verification. They're just ignoring the medical that's in front of them. In my case is a perfect example of that. In fact, in my case, the board has stated in an interoffice memo that I am unemployable based on all the medical information, and yet they ignore that fact themselves, that they themselves have said it. They ignore it. They don't want to say it. After they've written it down, it's in the files, and there's a prime example of hypocrisy.
That was Jim Buddy, an injured worker and longtime adjutant for changes to the workers' compensation system in Manitoba. You're listening to the second in a 3-part series reviewing the workers' compensation system in Canada. I'm Michael Welch. In the first installment, which aired yesterday, you heard some of the voices of people injured and disabled in workplace mishaps. They were angry about the treatment they received at the hands of the board. An authoritative report from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives came out in 2002 called Turning the Tide, Renewing Workers' Compensation in Manitoba. It pointed to reforms in Manitoba predominantly during the years of the Filmon government, in which more restrictions were placed on benefits that could be attained by injured workers. It stated that, quote, fault and conflict have been brought back to what was intended to be a no-fault, non-adversarial system, and that, quote, the reforms of the time had been largely based on an assumption that the unfunded liability was the result of workers' overutilization of the system. Jim Buddy was injured on the workplace in the 1990s after falling off a ladder at work and discovering that the human body actually does bounce off of concrete. He permanently hurt his back. For more than 2 years, Buddy has maintained a solitary one-man vigil at the entrance of the Manitoba legislature in an effort to draw the attention of MLAs, media, and the general public to the plight of not only himself, but of injured workers across the province and the need to change the workers' compensation system. I caught up with Jim last week. Here he speaks about the changes brought in by the NDP government, not going nearly far enough in addressing the failures within the current system.
Well, the NDP went and tried to do a minor reform, and they did make a couple of very minor changes, I think 3 or 4 of them. One of them being, like it used to be you got 75% of your wage, your gross pay. And then it was changed to, you got 90%.
As compensation.
Yes, and then it changed to 90% of your net pay. And then after 2 years, arbitrarily, they lowered you to 80% for whatever the reason was.
So 75% of your
gross at one time.
Gross versus 90% of your
net. And then it went to 80%. But they've taken out now, after 2 years, they're not lower to 80% anymore. You still get 90% of your net pay.
Gross and net, you're talking like before taxes.
Right, that's gross, and then now net, which is actually less money. They did do one more change just recently that I can recall, and that was the presumptuous clause, and I'm glad you brought that up too. They've added to it, they've expanded it. However, I've been finding out by talking with firefighters and people like that nothing has changed, which is one of my beefs, is have the board adhere and follow the act and policies as they are written, and that in itself would be just a start. But the firefighters fought for years to get these testicular cancer, esophageal cancer, part of that presumption clause. But still, when they go in to try and make a claim, the board does the same thing to them as they're doing to people like me. Well, we don't think so. That we don't think this has anything. And that's what, again, presumption means. You presume the cancer is caused by this without any arguing. Yet the board still says to firefighters, no. And I've learned this from firefighters by being here. I'd like to get together with Alex Forrest and talk with him a little bit more, seeing if him and I can't work together a little more. So,
yeah, there would be a lot of injured workers with the
cancer. Firefighters. And the presumption clause should also be expanded to people like me. Let's just, hence no fault. We know that this happened while at work. Let's just presume that these injuries are now because of the accident. Or let's presume, with all the medical information on file, that this is what it is. So, if they would adhere to the act and policies, that's a good part of positive reform and humane reforms. It's a human factor that everybody's forgetting about. Everybody wants to talk money. Nobody wants to talk about the human factor and the spin-offs, and where it actually costs them lots and lots and thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars annually by allowing the board to shirk its responsibilities.
Do you think, though, that might be, by just focusing on the dollars and cents, that might be...
it's a major factor. It's with these guys, it's a major... Everything is money, and they got to take that out of the equation once in a while. Yeah. You've got to. You got to look at the human factor, the human cost. Like you're filling up prisons, or you put guys in prison that shouldn't be there. You get guys breaking laws that they're not really trying to break the law. They're trying to survive. They're trying to eat. They're trying to live somewhere there. I've met people here that had good jobs. At Boeing Canada, one guy springs to mind all the time. In the wintertime, he rents a one-room joint somewhere in the core area because the board screwed him around. He's finished, he's broken, he's like me. And in the summertime, he sleeps under a bridge.
Jeez.
Yeah, so I've met several different walks and types of people, but most of them are broken and give up and tired. People kill themselves because they don't know where else to go. You don't know what questions to ask. They don't know how. They're misguided. The information is not forthcoming. They don't give you your right. They give you an illusion of rights, and there's an illusion of things out there that will help you. But each one of those illusionary things sends you to whoever just sent you there, or sends you around, or gives you some rhetoric. At the end of the day, it's your opinion versus theirs, and too bad, so sad. See you later. See, they're all connected together. These illusionary places that are supposed to help you, they're all been appointed by friends. And if you look at the big net, you'll see some of these people are related, or they're friends, or they've given to said party in power to get said positions. The board has violated its own act, in my opinion, by having Alan Scramstead, who was at the time corporate secretary, resign his position so this
Corporate secretary of the board?
Yes, so he could resign his position so the lieutenant governor could appoint him to head of the WCB Appeal Commission. That is a direct conflict of interest issue.
There is a perception out there that a lot of these people who are just sort of faking back injuries. Oh, I hurt my back.
You can't do that, and not with today's medical science anymore. There's no way. Scammers are weeded out very quickly now. And see, yeah, you're right. People do think.
I mean, they'll say they have footage of someone who
that's such an old
shingled their roof, and then
good. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's such a phallus and such a perpetuated piece of crap, whatever. But when I walked up and started doing what I'm doing, lobbying and advocating, I used to believe, say you got 10 injured guys, legitimately injured and seriously hurt, I used to believe 3 of those were scammers and cheats. I've learned, even from the board, it's a lot lower. It's more like 0.5 of those are liars and cheats that are trying to scam money out of the system. And then moving on with that, today's medical science will weed out these cheats and liars and that very quickly. My opinion.
And yet thousands, in your opinion, are injured who are not getting compensated.
Thousands.
In Manitoba alone.
In Manitoba alone. It's a national problem, but I can't worry about the nation at this time. I'm dealing only with Manitoba, where I live.
Yeah. So, but that seems so incredible that amount. I mean, you talk about the injuries, the poverty, the suicides, and all the rest of it.
Family breakups.
And yet it's not in the media. Well, it's not,
because the media don't want to touch it, and I'm not exactly sure why that is. Yet it's a human factor issue, and apparently the media is supposed to be about the human touch and the human factor, but I've had several media approach me that want to do it, but their editors say, no, not at this time. No. Why not? It's a good question. It's a really good question.
Disabled worker and activist Jim Buddy. Another longtime critic of the workers' compensation system is Wayne Cody. He has, since 1999, been championing the rights of injured and disabled workers who have been denied compensation. He's based in Nova Scotia. Wayne believes there are problems not only with the Compensation Board compliance with the Workers' Compensation Act, but with the Act itself.
Every provincial government has in place a workmen's compensation law. I find that this law permits abuse, the mental abuse of injured workers. I say this simply because when you look at the way the boards are set up, they have what they call an internal review process. And in this whole process, it's nothing but a trail of denial of claim. And the process can go over several years. During this length of time, the injured worker is constantly in the program and fighting for his right to benefit. In the whole process, they end up losing their homes, going into bankruptcy. Marriages have been split apart because of this, which creates child poverty. Some injured workers attempt suicide. Some injured workers succeed in suicide because of this abusive law. The benefactors to all of this are those people who own the fund and control the fund, and that's the business community. unions and the government. And it's to their benefit that an injured worker is terminated from their benefits and cut off, because they no longer then have to worry about paying into the fund that injured workers' benefits. Here in Nova Scotia, for an example, the bill was brought before the legislature in 1915 and was brought into law in 1917. And at this time in history, there was a war being fought, and it was called the First World War. The people that would be most affected by it were in another part of the world fighting this war. Women weren't allowed to vote. So what happened, government and the business community and the unions decided amongst themselves, the three of them, decided that they would pass this law, bring it into action, and they removed my rights back in 1917 in this province, and it happened all across Canada in the same way, without taking it to a public vote. The Nova Scotia Workmen's Compensation Act, it states in the Act, in sections 167, no person, and then this is called the immunity from suit, and section 167 states, no person may bring an action or proceeding for damages in a court of law against the board, any member or board of directors, any official or employee of the board, the appeals tribunal or any member of the appeals tribunal, any member of the medical review commission established pursuant to section 203 for any actions or omissions within the jurisdiction conferred by this part or beyond the jurisdiction conferred in this part. In other words, what they're saying there is, for an example, if a caseworker takes my file and maybe that caseworker does not personally take a liking to me, they can put something in there that can cause my claim to be terminated, and I have no right to take action against that individual. Then when you go to sections 195, every report submit, and this is called medical records privileged, section 195, every report submitted to the board or appeals tribunal by a physician, surgeon, hospital official, or other healthcare professional, A, is a privileged communications of the person submitting the report. B, is not admissible as evidence in any action against a physician, surgeon, hospital official, healthcare professional. And then finally, the hammer is no right to representation, section 270. Nothing in this part gives any person the right to legal advice or representation under the program. This all means basically I have no right to seek legal advice to ensure that my rights are being protected. I cannot sue a doctor if they put false medical information in my medical report. I cannot sue any member of the board of the WCB staff or anybody if they malign me in that report. This goes against Section 15 of the Canadian Constitution. So this is three sections in our act in Nova Scotia, and this is right straight across the country. It might be worded differently, but the people who are supposed to be looking after us are protected, even if they put something that maligns us in our reports. What we have, in my personal opinion, is a law on the books in every province that permits the abuse of those people injured in the workplace. And until this law is repealed and reviewed, this will continue on and on. I mean, I helped about 2 years ago an injured worker who had a very serious back injury. And he came to my house, and I said to him, here's a tape recorder. When you go to your medical examination at the QE2 hospital with this surgeon, you take this recorder, slip it in your pocket, and turn it on. This surgeon told Randy 3 times on the tape, you are a good candidate for a back operation. And then at the end of the third time he said this, he said, but this depends on whether or not the Workmen's Compensation Board will approve it. So when Randy came home and played that tape for me, I immediately got on my computer, put together a fax, and sent it over to this doctor, and I asked him this question: what right do you have to refuse this injured worker a back operation that's going to improve his health based on the fact that the Workmen's Compensation Board may not pay for it or approve it? I said, first and foremost, Randy Turner is your patient. He is your first concern. The Workmen's Compensation Board will deal with them after he gets his operation. You know? So to be able to Randy should have been able to take that information and proceed into and take an action against that surgeon. You know, but it was not. So this law that they call the Workmen's Compensation Law is not there to assist injured workers. It further disadvantages injured workers.
The London and Middlesex Injured Workers and Repetitive Strain Injury Support and Information Group, in conjunction with the London and District Labour Council, released a report on the impacts of workplace injury at a press conference in June of last year. Key findings of the report, which have implications for Manitoba and other jurisdictions, include the following. Injured workers experience nearly 4 times the rate of poverty for Ontario. 1 in 5 workers lost their home after injury. Incidents of subsidized housing more than doubled after injury. 1 in 5 workers are on social assistance after injury. 1 in 5 workers are living in extreme poverty post-injury. Less than $10,000 per year, in fact. 41% reported an income of less than $15,000 a year. The report found a 13-fold increase in food bank usage post-injury. 1/4 of injured workers lost their car. 61% of injured workers were unemployed after injury. Prior to injury, 89% were employed full-time. Almost half, 46%, reported depression as a result of their workplace injury, and 3/4 of the local group have considered suicide. 2/3 of injured workers reported losing friends, and 18% have lost family due to strained relationships. This is what activists like Buddy and Cody mean when they talk about shifting responsibility away from the employer-financed board and on to taxpayers. Tomorrow we will continue this conversation and attempt to find solutions to the problems plaguing not just injured workers, but society at large as a result. Join us then. Today is April 28th. It was on this date in 1914 that the Canadian House of Commons passed the Workmen's Compensation Act. This legislation enacted the creation of provincial-level workmen's compensation boards across the country. It is known today as the Historic Compromise. Workers injured or disabled on the workplace would be entitled to full and fair compensation. The employers, in exchange, would be protected from lawsuits from injured workers. Has the Historic Compromise lived up to its promise? As you've heard in the last 2 episodes, many Canadian workers would reply, hardly. The system, which was supposed to be no fault and non-adversarial, today puts the onus on the injured worker to prove his injury was sustained on the workplace. That is, the board, rather than the worker, receives the benefit of the doubt. Every province has its own board, and problems are being reported from across the country. For the purposes of this broadcast, we will turn our attention to Manitoba. In 2002, a Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives document called Turning the Tide, Renewing Workers' Compensation in Manitoba, by researcher Doug Smith, outlined deficiencies in the compensation system and increased incidence of claimants being inadequately compensated, if compensated at all. According to the document, a series of amendments were introduced in the 1990s which had the impact of reducing benefits, reducing the number of compensable injuries, and reintroducing an adversarial approach to the system. The thinking behind these changes, according to Doug Smith, was inspired by the largely unfounded view that workers were likely to be malingerers, whiners, and outright frauds. Of course, this paper is now about 8 years out of date. Is there more recent research that can address the current state of the workers' compensation system in Manitoba?
My name is Brian Jeffrey Parker Campbell. I am a proud member of the United Steelworkers Local 9074. I'm the recording secretary of the largest amalgamated steelworkers union in the province of Manitoba.
Brian Campbell is the Health and Safety Chair for the Southern Manitoba Area Council of Steelworkers, representing 4,000 working people across the province. He's currently on secondment to the Manitoba Federation of Labour and author of a soon-to-be-released report on Workers' Compensation Board claim suppression in Manitoba. I spoke to him recently for his input on the challenges faced by workers and their families being confronted by a workers' compensation board seemingly hostile to their interests.
You had referenced some of the sort of the gutting of the system that had happened in 1992 under the Philman regime, and that's absolutely true. Everybody who was on long-term benefits was kicked off. They switched from sort of a pension payment program to what's called permanent partial impairment awards, which gives you a functional capacity rating, which tells you how much you are disabled, right? And they actually have a thing called the meat chart that will tell you how much each body part is worth, reduced lung capacity caused by asbestos exposure, so asbestosis, mesothelioma. They'll tell you, there's a formula for this that will actually tell you that. That doesn't cover, like those are substantiated things, right? Hearing loss is an occupational disease that is covered quite frequently. Some cancers, we have a presumptive clause for the firefighters because in 2006 they had the legislation changed after a lot of lobbying on the Gary Dewar government. But things such as heart attacks, very, very, very hard to prove. Heart disease, things such as cardiomyopathy, toxic myocarditis. These are sort of the emerging things of occupational health and safety that we're linking from toxic exposure in the workplace to untimely deaths. And the WCB will not pursue these claims. You have to have what they call objective medical evidence, right? Not subjective, but objective medical evidence that shows absolutely that you have 10 medical reports from peer-reviewed sources and universities that can substantiate that this truly is the dominant cause. We have to remember that the Workers' Compensation Board system is not set up on case law, right? So just because one person's case for occupational disease was accepted at one time doesn't mean that the person who worked next to him for 35 years is going to have that same acceptance, even though they were probably exposed and subjected to the same amount of toxins over amount of time. It's based on natural justice, right? So it's a balance of probability. And quite often what they will go fishing for, and I always use this term fishing with the WCB, is because they'll try and find something that you could say was more of a dominant cause than, the fact that you worked on a production line for, 30 years doing the same repetitive motions. and you sustained, repetitive strain injuries, carpal tunnel syndrome, well, that's because you went home and you played video games, or you played the piano, or you did some other sort of activity. They try and, justify it by that means. So in relation to the estimations of the number of people who are, dying or dead from occupational disease, we'll never be able to fully fathom or grip that number. But I think Doug Smith probably ballparked it a little low at 1,000. I think there's probably many, many more there. And we just don't have the ability to link it with our current understanding of occupational health. The Meredith report that came out in 1914 in Ontario pinpointed 5 principles that this system would be based upon. And you're absolutely right. One of those was guaranteed access to the funds, and the trade-off would be that you could not pursue legal action against your employer, except in some very, very rare occasions that has happened. Now, an interesting point to remember is that only 75% of the workforce of Manitoba is currently covered by Workers' Compensation Board coverage. Teachers are not covered. Up until 2009, agricultural workers were not covered. So people who worked even in, greenhouses and nurseries and stuff like that were not covered by the Workers' Compensation Act. Manitoba is the one province that was not inclusionary, it was exclusionary. So when the act was written in 1917, they said all the industries that are included in the Workers' Compensation Act, but since 1917 we've had technological and industry development. So people who work at video rental stores don't have Workers' Compensation Board coverage. People who work at telemarketing industries, which covers roughly about 11,000 Manitobans, don't have Workers' Compensation coverage. So in 2004, the Minister of Labour called a review of the Workers' Compensation Board system and tried to expand the coverage. The biggest problem was that they couldn't get teachers to buy into it, because right now stress, cumulative traumatic stress, which is the number one occupational injury for educators and teachers, is not covered. And the WCB wants it to be covered, but the employers do not want it to be covered, because it's rather hard to adjudicate that, right? If I'm missing a finger, you can say, oh, geez, that guy's missing a finger. If I say, I'm literally disabled by the amount of stress that's being inflicted into me, well, that's a little harder to judge, right? Because you can't necessarily see that, and it's not as visible. So those are also considerations when we talk about that coverage. But I mean, the principles of the historic compromise have been eroded to the point where pretty much we're dealing with an employer's insurance program at this present time, and it's a disservice to all the people who have to put their own working lives and their families' economic future on the line just because their employers injured, maimed, and killed them while on the job. Yeah. Labor workers have 3 spots on the board of directors. Employers have 3 spots on the board of directors, and then public interest also has 3 spots on the board of directors. Those people are usually appointed by the government to sort of act as a protection and a balance and everything like that. We also have a chair, which has a vote. So there's 10 people on the board of directors who have voting rights. And quite unfortunately, what happens is that the people who are appointed as members of the general public, they get their, delusions of wanting to be a capitalist and wanting to be some sort of big shot employer. And quite often they vote that way. So in a lot of circumstances, it's 7-on-3, the way the votes come down with the board of directors. And the board of directors sets policy, it sets regulation, and it can even make recommendations to changes in the act. So none of those are good things at all.
Could you maybe talk about the issue of the chronic pain and where because my understanding is that it's seen as a psychological category?
Yeah, chronic pain syndrome is something that is grappled with the pain unit. They actually have a pain unit over at the Workers' Compensation Board. Now, in advocating on behalf of and working with a lot of injured workers who have experienced the chronic pain syndrome and phenomena, when you read their case files, there's always a value judgment attached to it. Anytime that they meet with a doctor, an adjudicator, or a case manager, medical advisors at the WCB, as to whether or not they're being truthful. So if the person seems to grimace a lot and experience a lot of pain, and it's almost as if there must be seminars put on for them to be able to try and detect this fraudulent nature. And we always hear of fraud being perpetrated by injured workers, right? And these stories get blown up in the media many times about someone who is supposed to be on WC benefits and bedridden, and they catch them, videotape them, moving a couch or something like that. Well, that phenomena is referred to as moral hazard over at the WCB. And even Dave Scott, the Vice President of the Workers' Compensation Board, will tell you that the instances of this are ridiculously negatable. It's 0.01% of people who actually are on workers' compensation who are in some way embellishing or trying to cheat on the system. Much more often, the perpetrations and the real injustice comes from the employer's side, where they're denying people their benefits in the first place. Never mind the people who are lucky enough to actually get a claim accepted and live through the fear and intimidation of their employers. But afterwards, they have a video surveillance team. They actually have a special investigations unit at the WCB comprised of 4 investigators who will go out and videotape people. They have audio-visual equipment that can videotape you from about 1 kilometer away, and they'll follow you in the grocery store. They'll do all sorts of things to say, aha, this person was working without their restrictions, because your own personal doctor will set out restrictions, right? You can't lift more than 20 pounds repetitively. This person can't sit or stand in certain types of positions. If they catch you doing this, then they take it right in there to the case manager and try and get that overturned, right? 98% of the resources of the Special Investigations Unit go on trying to find incidents of dishonesty by the claimants, not employers doing claim suppression, right? Actively denying the benefits of injured workers, but it goes on the injured workers who have been lucky enough to get benefits to try and get them kicked off again. So it's a little ridiculous. The resources that go into following around injured workers are totally misallocated. I believe that they could be going to a much better purpose, right? Maybe trying to find cancer hotspots in the province of Manitoba, where we know that there's been vast amounts of exposure, and trying to set up databases and different stuff like that. That doesn't happen, though, unfortunately. So yeah, I think those resources at the Special Investigations Unit of the Workers' Compensation Board should go to looking at employers who discriminate and intimidate against their employees who are trying to pursue their rightful benefits under the Workers' Compensation Act and under the historic compromise that was enshrined in 1917. And if they want to go back to workers suing employers for killing, injuring, and maiming them, that's fine, because we can show negligence on just about every account of the employer who has not done their own due diligence to protect the health, safety, and welfare of that worker in the workplace.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about how the system is adversarial, and when it's not supposed to be adversarial.
That's right, yeah.
And this idea of doctors, like expert medical opinion, this has come up on several occasions, or being essentially overruled by an adjudicator.
If you just go to your regular doctor with a workplace injury and you say, hey, look, this happened at work, well, WCB is going to consider them to be biased, all right, because you already have a pre-existing relationship with that particular medical practitioner. Now, you're going to have to go into the Workers' Compensation Board and be poked and prodded and adjudicated by one of what they call their medical advisors, who are paid doctors, and they have a very set agenda, right? They're supposed to say yay or nay, this is a workplace-induced injury, and foreseeably this person should recoup with physiotherapy, with this or that. The WCB has a policy of mitigation, and what mitigation is taking away your benefits if you're not getting better, right? They say, well, you're not trying with your physiotherapy, you're not trying with your vocational rehabilitation program, we're going to kick you off benefits, and that's going to teach you a lesson. And quite often that's what they do. And really, in Winnipeg, when I first came to the city here, a couple things struck me. The rampant poverty in the downtown core of Winnipeg. But also when you started talking to a lot of these people, you found out that a lot of their trials and tribulations and their sort of decline into the cycle of poverty started with workplace injuries that were never properly addressed, that were never adequately compensated by the Workers' Compensation Board. It's amazing how many people, if you go to the Salvation Army or the Shalom Mission or any of these places, go talk to them. A lot of them, were subject to workplace injuries that were not properly filed for or claimed.
Now, you just recently authored a report on claim suppression.
What companies are trying to do is save themselves money by having less reportable workplace injuries to the Workers' Compensation Board. Our research was conducted from September 2009 until about the end of March 2010. Section 19.1 of the Workers' Compensation Act strictly forbids claim suppression. And this is speaking to employers. Employers cannot coerce you, intimidate, or discriminate against you to make you not pursue your Workers' Compensation Board benefits. Unfortunately, this happens at a rampant level here in the province of Manitoba, and it's almost become a business model in many circumstances. The penalty that is assessed when a company is found to be, in fact, suppressing claims is a measly $450. And even upon a moment's contemplation, you can think that, well, this isn't going to be sort of any incentive for them not to do this, right? Because the cost of a workers' compensation claim can be very high when you talk about lost wages and the medical expenses incurred onto the system. So therefore, their insurance ratings go up, right? Their premiums go up that they have to pay. So it's in their interest for their injured and maimed and killed workers not to pursue these particular type of benefits.
When you have new immigrants or people who would just not be coming here if it wasn't for the fact that there are some hazardous work conditions that a lot of local people just wouldn't want to take on, like the hog industry, for instance. Do you have any insights into how workers' compensation issues factor into that?
They do factor into it. A lot of these workers come from countries where you don't necessarily want to trust the government. You don't necessarily want to trust the union, right? And unfortunately, that's one of our biggest hurdles is the language barriers that are erected at the WCB, because to get a translator service is very, very hard. I feel that it is the job of organized labor, of union members in Manitoba, of community members in Manitoba, to ensure that people under the foreign temporary worker program, that people under the seasonal agricultural worker program should have the same benefits, the same access to workers' compensation, the same benefits to health care that we all enjoy, because really they are the economic engine of the province. And quite unjustly, they're not recognized as such. And quite often they're the most marginalized, exploited, and vulnerable segments of the society. And that's who this claim suppression gets perpetrated on most often. When we do hear of the Workers' Compensation Board in the media, there's hostage takings that have been perpetrated in Alberta. There's a fellow who drove his steps up on the front of 333 Broadway in 2007. There's been multiple situations where tragically injured workers have taken their own life in the parking lot of the Workers' Compensation Board offices. Those instances alone are cause for a thorough examination of the Workers' Compensation Board system.
Brian Campbell of the United Steelworkers, speaking to me recently on the eve of a soon-to-be-released report on WCB claim suppression. As we conclude this look at our workers' compensation system, I acknowledge that this has been a far from comprehensive report. Hopefully listeners will feel encouraged to ask some questions and do their own research. One place to start would be the website for the Canadian Injured Workers Society. It's located at ciws.ca. Also, I did attempt to contact the WCB for their input. They turned down my request for an interview. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a pleasant day.
While you're waiting for the great leap forward.